Thank you everyone for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Renee Gray, Professional Development Coordinator with CTSI, and I have the pleasure of introducing Ann Schnatterly. Ann is the Interim Director at WVU Cancer Institute Clinical Research Unit, as well as the Executive Director of West Virginia Cancer Clinical Trials Network. Ann has been involved in clinical research for over 20 years. While pursuing her nursing degree at Case Western Reserve University, she was introduced to the world of research as a data coordinator for a public health study of infant pulmonary hemosiderosis and black mold. After a few years of floor nursing in the adult organ transplant program, she returned to pediatrics as a cystic fibrosis research nurse. Ann began her career in cancer research at University Hospitals of Cleveland Seidman Cancer Center in 2000, concentrating in lung cancer and HIV malignancies, including the opportunity to work with international sites in Africa. Eventually, Ann progressed into a management track, oversaw operations, including a regional network, BMT clinical trials, and a phase 1 developmental therapeutics program. Ann joined WVU in the summer of 2014 with the challenge to develop the cancer portfolio as well as bring the newly created West Virginia Cancer Clinical Trials Network from concept to a reality, and has greatly enjoyed the collaboration and reciprocal growth with the cancer team in the States. I now present to you Ann Schnatterly.
Wait, and. So I've given this talk on campus once or twice before, so for those who are repeating it, I apologize. It's always good to have a nice little refresher and different points and different things that you can bring back to your PIs and your management team of areas that you could improve on or skill sets that you guys could add to your research portfolio as well. This talk is going to encompass what we would consider a 12-week orientation period into 45 minutes. So we're really going to keep it very high level. We've always had some very great questions come out of this talk and follow up for either myself or for Shelley Welch, my counterpart, who's the manager over on the CTSI side as well. So feel free to make a question and answer form as we're moving through the end of this presentation. Okay. And for those who are listening and zoomed in, then we can also take your questions as we move along. Just gonna go on. I want to start off that Monday or actually Sunday for May 20th, but we're honoring it on May 21st in the US, is the International Clinical Trials Day. And this is really the anniversary date to commemorate the day that James Lynn, he was a physician on a British ship, did a trial on scurvy. Did a randomized controlled study on the people on the ship about scurvy. Kind of a fun little thing and tidbit to do if you're out there promoting clinical trials and research. Nice social media posting to put up there. Lots of infographics are out there. So, but it's also a day for us to celebrate ourselves and really all that we do to make clinical research possible and how we're moving science forward. So I'm going to go over the key areas that research coordinators sort of oversee through their lifetime on their project. And you'll see, we'll just go these in more detail as we move through. So we'll start, a typical study team. I'm sure there's some of you who are an N of 1. You have a PI, you have you. And so you might be like the Dr. Smith, where Dr. Smith is the PI, and then Alice does everything. So for these areas and focus, you'll have a little bit in all these spots. For some of our teams, they may have a nurse who handles all of the clinical coordination, all the data manager. They have one regulatory, they have one financial person. Over on the Cancer Center, due to the breadth of our clinical trials program and our size, we have individual people that have individual duties that are related to all these competencies. It's nice for you guys to know all the individual parts, but you'll see just depending on your size where you may have more focus on. Okay, so the value of having a research coordinator. I've given this talk where I've had many young PIs and young investigators in the audience. And they're like, well, I have a very small grant, I can't afford to pay a research coordinator, and you may be in this audience again today. And we just really want to emphasize what that value is and how that comes back to you as a PI. You can't possibly right now manage your whole trial portfolio on your own independently. You have to have a team. You'd appreciate having a team. It keeps you safe, and it keeps you running within your investigator responsibilities. Research coordinators are really considered the project managers. A lot of them stop at the research nurses, and then they use their team to delegate their duties. We have people sort of standing with our data managers, our research nurses, and our regulatory coordinators. Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. We'll get some chairs here. Get some chairs here. All right, and you'll see that lots of other people say the little infographic image about study coordinator. You know what your friends think you do? You're just meeting scientists and everybody else, but what you actually do is just, you feel like it's just mounds of paperwork, mounds of filing, and mounds of reporting. But really, it's a compilation of all of these things that really makes us want to be in this career path. Another common question is if a research coordinator has to be a nurse. And you'll see that for a lot of my discussion, I will use research nursing and research coordinator interchangeably. Probably more than likely, I'll refer to it as a research nurse that will have the key subject-related duties, but we have a lot of non-nurse coordinators as well in the cancer program and other departments across campus. So really, it's kind of looking at what the scope of your project is. The biggest thing I need to emphasize is the scope of practice. So when you're looking at doing a new clinical trial, how will that research project interact with your clinicians? What are the roles and responsibilities of those that are going to be involved in the project? And then make sure that you're operating within the scope of their licensure. If you have any questions about licensure, you should talk to either the nursing department or the hospital. You can call us to say, you know, can I have an MA delegate to all these duties? We could look at state licensing for that, but really make sure that you're first and foremost adhering to the state rules and regulations on what this person is allowed to do. Ensure that all your training and delegation logs, and we'll get into that a little bit further as well, is that not only are they scoped by practice, but they're trained and they're delegated to perform these duties as well. There are a lot of different things that are coming out right now in competencies and orientation programs for research and staff and professionals out there. For the basis of this talk, we're going to use the updated 2016 Oncology Nursing Society for our competencies. I come from the cancer world right now, so those are the most relatable for what our unit is using on their annual competency review. Most of them translate out. You may see that I might use some oncology terms also in this talk that might not be applicable to your unit, but you can just interface them to what you know you will be working with every day. Okay, so the key thing is always ethical standards. You always have to make sure that we are aligning ourselves with all international, federal, state, and local regulations and human subject protections. Most of us do this through our city training, but continuously doing education throughout your career to make sure that you're adhering to any changes in ethics standards, that when you're doing international trials, that you're adhering to the Helsinki or the international codes and not just doing the FDA route as well. So making sure you have a good understanding of all the different regulations out there. Also, our first key thing as a coordinator, and we'll talk about consenting and things later on, is that we are the person that's usually the middleman. So in that, we're the ones that deal with the patients and consenting them and screening them and seeing if they're eligible. And we're the ones that are talking to the sponsors and the PIs and all the pressures that everybody that's saying enroll, enroll, enroll. So it's very good for you to have a solid understanding of where you sit for vulnerable populations. Understand what a vulnerable, I'm gonna trip over that word all the time. Vulnerable population is what that means to you. If you're working with children, if you're working with prisoners, if you're working with pregnant women, if you're working with those with decreased mental capacity, whatever it may be that may be considered vulnerable, and how you protect them and comply with the regulations as well. Oops. Windows 10. City training, everyone knows about that. Just make sure it's something that you keep up to date. City training is a good refresher. We have to do a refresher every couple of years, but sometimes it's just nice for you to get back into it and say, hey, I could use something on good clinical practice or a refresher on conflict of interest, whatever it may be. Your time there, if you're SOAP or ACRP certified, you can use it as your hours for continuing ed also. The one thing that not everybody is aware of if you're new to clinical research is that we also have the clinical research coordinator module in City that gives you some very basic knowledge as well on just oversight on the clinical research side. I want to emphasize PI responsibility. I talk a lot about the role of the research coordinator, but none of these roles really can be followed through unless you're delegated to have these from your PI. So overall, the PI is the one who's going to assume all the risk that's going on with this clinical trial. They're the name that's on the top of this filing. They're the name that's going to be reported to the FDA. They're the name that goes through all the publications and papers. So with that, the PI needs to make sure that they understand they're assuming this responsibility and they're overseeing that your training and delegation is completed, not just for you as a coordinator, but for all the associated staff that will be interacting with these patients. Okay, first area, protocol compliance. So really protocol compliance, to talk about the key competency is that you facilitate the compliance with requirements of the protocol and GCP while remaining cognizant of the needs of your patient population. So balancing what you need to do for the protocol, what you need to do for regulations, and how to best care for your subjects. How you adhere to this, making sure you understand the objectives of the study and the outcome measures of the study. So not just what you're trying to do to the patient, but how you will follow up with those patients as time goes on. Understand your regulations, as I mentioned earlier. Making sure that you can comply with processes and procedures that are required by the sponsor and then also required by the protocol. Feasibility is a big thing I'll talk about in a second, but really make sure that your clinical team is ensuring it's feasible to participate in this clinical trial. Make sure that you can identify any barriers or implement procedures for maintaining the subject's safety or anything that might affect their ability to participate in the clinical trial. Look for how you're going to facilitate and respond to sponsor and monitor needs for data completion, scheduled and unscheduled meetings, how you're going to participate with any sort of monitoring or auditing that may happen, and quality assurance. Ensure your validity of the research results by making sure that we have timely, accurate, and complete reporting of all your adverse events, deviations, IRB continuing reviews, unanticipated problems, anything else that's required through lifetime of that protocol. A lot of us concentrate on getting the study open. Then you have to make sure that you have the ability to keep that study until it's completed. Collaborate with your PI and your pharmacy and other personnel to ensure that we also have proper use and communication. A lot of us interact with a lot of other departments, so just make sure before you open that study, there's a clear understanding and delegation of responsibility for that. Biggest thing is educate yourself. Okay, a lot of us have that pressure to open up the study before because they have a grant that starts this date, time that starts this date. But yeah, especially grants, enrollment, whatever it may be. But really take that moment, because if you don't know at the beginning, catching up later on is not going to happen. So make sure you understand your protocol. Use that time at study startup. Make sure you spend that time with Lisa's over here from Investigational Pharmacy, with whoever may be working with your drug or your device. Make sure that they have a good one-on-one education understanding. Understanding your dose limiting toxicities or when you're dose modifying, that you have clear order sets. If you're not doing an interventional study, it's more of a registry, defining all those data collection time points that you have to make sure that you have follow-up with them. But know your protocol. Know your disease. Some of us kind of get handed a disease that we've never dealt with before. As you see, I've dealt with many different age groups and many different populations. Kind of have to go in there. Thank God nowadays we have Google, and you say, "What is multiple myeloma?" Right? Tanya had to do that recently when she audited us, and you can get all sorts of things, So it's a little bit easier, but really make sure that you take that time. Follow your investigators. If you're new to a disease population, I follow my docs in clinic and say, I just want to hear how you talk to the patients that are not in clinical trials. Let me learn the language. Let me learn how you communicate with your patients so that I can mimic that in that same vocabulary when I'm talking to them and presenting them. All right, feasibility resources. I'm going to just touch on this because I know Shelley has talked a lot about kinetics in the past. But it really is a great resource. IDR can be a great resource. But when you're looking at feasibility of a new disease population, you know, tap into Trinetics and pull it by your ICD code. Pull it by if it's looking at a special reaction to a medication, if you're trying to track a certain disease code. Use the resources that you have to show that we have a population here before you sign up to do a study. So you don't promise numbers you don't have.
Super easy to use. If you need it, just see me and we can get it for you.
Big major things that you have to have before you open a study. Again, I'm condensing 8 weeks of knowledge into 45 minutes. Department approvals. So your PI may say they want to do a trial, and you may want to see that you do a trial. You have to make sure your department chair approves that you guys can do that trial, use those resources. Contractual approvals, including your budget preparation. I always like these small little investigator-initiated trials, and it's not going to take too much work. It shouldn't really cost that much money. All right, all trials spend money. All trials cost something. So making sure your department understands how that money is getting spent. Not all trials receive money, so I wasn't wrong when I stated that. Check that. Not everything receives money, but all trials spend money. Regulatory approvals, IRB approvals, but also make sure there's not any other regulatory approvals for those who may be new to doing something that involves a radiation component. We have a radiation safety board. If you're doing immunizations or live vaccines, we have the biosafety board. So there are a lot of other different committees that might be on campus that you haven't worked with before. This goes through regulatory approvals and required documents. As you guys know, your protocol, of course, you have to have your informed consent, but this also talks about other things. Make sure that you have an investigator CV that's dated and contemporary. They'll always be wanting to look at that to make sure that the investigator can credential on that trial. Make sure you have their licensure, that you have your licensure, anybody else that might be required on that team. Lab certifications of lab normals. You'll always want, anytime a patient goes to a different lab, you have to collect lab normals for that. IRB, I've mentioned, informed consent, I've mentioned, patient recruitment materials, financial disclosure, conflict of interest, the 1572, the all-encompassing 1572, which is your investigator attestation that he commits to run the study according to 21 CFR. And then if you're the sponsor, look at clinicaltrials.gov. You have to register it. So it's an investigator-initiated study. You have to register it on some sort of public accessible site for you to be able to publish it later on. Protocol startup. Real quick, one slide. So when you're the project leader as the research coordinator usually at that PI. So you're going to be scheduling the study startup meeting. There are a lot of different documents out there. If it's a sponsor, they're probably going to be coming and leading the meeting. I strongly urge you to have something similar to what I have in this corner, a meeting notes page. Okay, so even if it's a sponsor that's leading it, even if it's another institution that's coming in and training you, keep these meeting notes, and they kind of say what was discussed and what follow-up items have to be completed before you open, so that you know that everything has been answered, so that you can sit there and say, all right, we talked about, oh, we need to do EKGs and they have to be read before I dose. Assign a follow-up person to do that. If you know that you're going to be dealing with central radiology or labs, how are you going to get those results back? So really kind of keep that note there so you can close it up before you open that study. Also make sure you have your recruitment, advertisements, that you have orders, just working through your team and having a checklist. We utilize Encore, and I'll show you Encore at the end for those who are not familiar. We have a study startup task list that our coordinators go and fill in that kind of leads them through the key areas before they open a study. I mentioned delegation of authority log. Won't spend too much time on this, but just make sure that you do have something. If it's not something that you have by a sponsor, if you need an internal one, we both have resources for that. We can send you templates to use. But just make sure your PI has agreed and signs off on that before they perform any duties, as well as training.
So you always want to delegate that or always want to document that you've trained your people before they're actually doing that task. Usually this is done at site initiation visit. Now, after you open a clinical trial, sometimes, like I talked about, you open it, you have all the hoopla of opening it, everything, your red binders are great, and then you don't look at your red binders again until continuing review. No. But, you know, things get busy. But you want to make sure that you're constantly maintaining your regulatory files, whether it's electronic, whether it's an Encore, whether it's a combination of paper and electronic system, sponsor-driven. Reg files have a variety of different lives, just like source documentation, medical records do. But just make sure you're keeping everything up to date, that all your approvals are there, everyone who has updated consent forms, that you're amending your consent forms in a timely fashion, that you have your correspondence to your sponsor filed within your red binder or in an electronic system that you can quickly reference it. All your enrollment logs are being kept up to date, whether using paper or a CTMS system. Investigational drug logs, usually Lisa keeps those in pharmacy for us, but if you're maintaining drug logs internally, that those are kept up to date with your study drug accountability, and of course lab manuals and biosample logs as well. At the end of your study, so you talked a lot of time about beginning it, but sometimes you also forget at the end that we have to close them out. So making sure that you're also communicating and closing out that chain with the IRB. That your sponsor will give you a closer to accrual notice after they've all enrolled. You don't want to close out a study just when the last patient comes off treatment, because you're going to probably be following them for a period of time. Make sure all of their off-study stuff has been completed, all your patients are off-study or subjects are off-study, and that the sponsor has agreed that they're not going to be collecting any sort of new data or anything else that will be coming along in that clinical trial. Once your IRB study closed, you can't go back into the subject files and collect new data without going back to the IRB. So it's not unusual in the cancer world that it will be a couple of years between our last patient coming off study and when the trial closes out, because they're analyzing all that data and making sure they don't have to go back to the medical records. So we hold on. After a lot of trials, we probably have a couple of years that we don't have patients on treatment. Shame my regulatory person.
So let me just be clear, because it's always been kind of a question to me. So IRB closure is when all data is now analyzed.
So we usually say all data is analyzed, but I believe if all the study, they can query you on clarifications of data they already had after IRB study closure. Mm-hmm. You just can't report anything new that wasn't collected. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But we've had different IRBs use different terms. IRB study closure versus terminated. Sometimes they do stuff that way too. So it really is clarifying.
And then the publication or journal, whatever they want to do with the data afterwards is fine.
Because the sponsor will own that data, it's all de-identified and clean.
Right.
You don't have to wait till publication.
And yeah, and I'm thinking more investigator-initiated studies are a little bit not as structured.
It's not unusual for those that they will not IRB study close them until they publish, just in case. They need to go back and look at it. I found that at least in the cancer world. Okay. Because they say, well, maybe I want to now analyze this biomarker. Right. You know, so they won't IRB study close it. Right. Okay. Or if they want a new aim, they just reopen a new study with the same data.
Oh, okay, that's true. Okay.
Make sure also retention of records. This is a big thing, especially on campus. Academic campuses such as us, where space is always a resource. Make sure you understand how long you have to keep those files. You know, they usually, it's for ICH guidelines, it's 2 years after the last approval, international approval. All right, so it's not, if the US FDA gets approval, doesn't mean 2 years after the US FDA approval, those records can be destroyed, we no longer need them. If that company, and most of them are, and they go after drug approval in the European countries or in the Asian market, then it can be 15 years or so until that final approval comes. So, and that's why a lot of our contracts will say you have to keep your records forever. But most of us have a dying mountain, never do anything with them again. So, all right. So next question. That's the longest of the big key area.
consent, one of the most important areas, to ensure that patient comprehension and safety during initial and ongoing clinical trial discussions occurs. So this is just making sure that you understand to facilitate and identify barriers to effective informed consent, that you abide by your institutional policy and the institutional process, as well as your IRB of record, if you're not using WVU IRB, to make sure you're using the right language in your consent form, that you collaborate with your PI to make it a team effort, to make sure that you are also working within your scope of practice when you're going through your informed consent and not prescribing treatment if you're not licensed to do so. Continue to assess and reinforce. Also make sure that you have timely reconsenting, supplemental materials. A lot of us have been going through consent. Back in the days, a lot of people would draw diagrams of the cancer cell and how it's going to attack it. It's become a lot more complicated than that. Medicine in general has become a lot more complicated with that, with genomic medicine. But making sure that you can develop some materials that these patients can understand or your subjects can understand. Ensure compliance with consent for your correlative studies to make sure that you're also following what's supposed to be done for your biospecimens. Now, who can obtain consent? Does it have to be the doctor? Does it have to be an MD? No, does not have to be an MD, right? We as an IRB or as an institution may say that we want it to be a treating physician. It's really dependent on what the research is about. If it's a clinical trial over the cancer center, where our consenting is actually the patient consenting to their line of care and their treatment plan, and we're talking to them about prescribing what treatment plan that we would want them to be on or randomized and educating, the treating physician is involved with the consent process. If it's a correlative study or a biospecimen study that really isn't impacting on that kind of clinical care decision making, then it does not necessarily have to be an MD. But you have to look at your institutional policies of what our IRB requires. It doesn't have to be the PI. It could be any of the treating physicians that are delegated as such duties on that delegation log and approved by the IRB to do so. Like I mentioned, research specialists can be delegated to consent for non-interventional trials, perhaps interventional, depending on your departmental rules. The biggest thing is to make sure that they're just individuals who have been delegated and are knowledgeable, so that they understand the disease, they understand the study, they can answer questions, and they can really fully explain this to their subject. Now, some hints. You always have to make sure, read my cartoon. I like that one. So our consent forms in the cancer world average probably about 30 pages. Yeah. And we're talking to patients who have metastatic cancer. We've already been sitting in the cancer clinic getting told that their disease has gotten worse, so that they have cancer to begin with. And then we're going to ask them to sit down and explain a 35-page form and ask them to initial and date each and every page when we do it. How many people do you think understand what we're talking to them about? None. Very small. We also have to talk about health literacy. Just because you have someone coming in that says, well, I'm a nurse and I worked over in the cardiac unit, really they're going to understand one thing when we start talking to them about chemotherapy drugs. So this is a process. It is a discussion that has to happen, and it's probably the largest big element that I really take pride in our oncology nurses and making sure they oversee that this is properly done. So always ask them, make sure it's private, make sure this is a good time, make sure they don't want anybody else with them, make sure they want to be alone, maybe there's people with them that they don't want to have part of this discussion, maybe they want somebody else to be involved. Okay, I've done lots of training just on the form of consent itself, so I'd be willing to talk to anybody about it because it can be so complicated.
Yeah, and I think there's a question in the chat.
Oh,
can you read the question? Not a question. Or is it not they want us to post?
Oh, put it on the YouTube. Yeah. It will be. We will. It will be on the YouTube channel. So assess your knowledge and experience, making sure that the patients understand what the word clinical trial. One of the big things at the end that you'll see about professional education and leadership is that getting out there and making sure the public knows what clinical trials are.
use International Clinical Trials Day to put it on your own personal Facebook page and say, hey, this is what I do. Do you guys understand what I do? You know, that they should understand this term, so they have that fear already done. They know that they're not going to be getting paid, that they're not going to sit here and be exploited, understand their safeguards. Sometimes you just have to explain that to them first. I worked in phase 1 oncology units and led a team there for many years. And we've had many patients, that discussion took weeks. I think our longest was 6. It took 6 weeks to get a patient consented. It took hours. It's a phase 1 drug. It's scary. This person was close to their pastor. They wanted their pastor involved. So you need to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. Alleviate the stress of the size of the document. So I always talk about, like I said, 30 pages. What's the longest? What's the longest anyone's ever had? What?
I had 32.
32? 46? Yeah. Okay. All right. I think I had with 40. So make sure that they understand. You know, medical treatment. This is this is the legal. Break it down for them in language that they can do. And they'll get there at the end of it and still not understand what you're saying. They're going to feel like they should, you know, get a pen and a house at the end of it. But just make sure they understand that it's still voluntary, still consent, and it's not a contract. That's the biggest thing. If patients get afraid, that will tell us if they don't want to do it. That you spent so much time with them, they feel like they have to sign it now. But make sure that they do that. This just kind of walks through it. All the different people that are involved. So of course, your IRB is involved. You as the coordinator in the middle, the investigator, your documentation, the patient, the integral person. But making sure you're also documenting this as a process. Sample note. We use a template in Smart Sets and Epic. If you would like this for your department, we are willing to share it. If you're using a similar one,
We have a note, but not a Smart Set.
okay, all right. But we use then that our coordinators complete this with what they completed with the patient, the dialogue. They add their comments of what they might have talked to with the patient. They send it to the treating physician. The treating physician can add in anything to the note, and then the treating physician can co-sign it. And then this is really what we're using to document that initial consent as well as reconsent in our process. But you want to make sure that you're covering all the areas with risk and benefits and voluntary, all the biospecimens, what's optional for them to consent to, and making sure that you're documenting that within their medical record. Okay, so we consented them. We know our study, we consented a patient. Actually, this is kind of backwards. Now we're going to patient recruitment. Just look at this. This is how you find your patients to begin with. So really making sure you understand how you can recruit safely, what's allowed to recruit, how you're allowed to go out to the public and talk to different groups, what groups you can go to, and talk to referring physicians. Now, we don't do this as much on the cancer side, but I know this has been quite successful on Shelley using Epic. And some other people with diabetes projects and other studies where they'll do automatic triggers or MyChart advertising. So if you have a clinical trial that might be looking for a pediatric patient population, you could do some MyChart advertising that the parents might see. If you have direct recruitment through MyChart where they will directly send a message to the patient themselves. You can also pull reports from Epic. So just like Trinetics does retrospective for feasibility, Epic can look at prospective real-time patients. If you have a couple of diagnostic criteria that you want to say, I want a patient who's positive, they can give you a daily report flat as well, so that you'll be able to identify patients in a timely manner to put on studies. Cancer World, we use 2 more boards, 2 more registries, more than that, but this is very common and a good resource outside of the oncology world. Just make sure everything that you have is written in a language that they understand. IRB and consent forms right now require 6th grade, 8th grade. 8th grade. It's so hard to explain what we do in 6th grade language. Advertisement, 6 is probably the maximum too. Probably even want a younger vocabulary grade level. So make sure that your advertisements are approved by your IRB as well as the sponsor. That they're not just advertising payment, but that they're also advertising what the study is looking at overall. Now, this comes up commonly, like how can we pull epic things, or what can we look at before we have patient consent? If you're a medical provider in a hospital system and you have epic stuff in your, or you're a treating physician, you can do a limited chart review if it's directly. Now, we don't do things like do a full medical review if you're just pulling certain diagnosis, certain prior treatments. That is allowed to happen before you directly consent that patient. If they're a patient within the system already and they already have signed off a HIPAA thing for the WVU facility, part of that usually has some language in there that they can be screened for clinical trials. You don't want to do anything that you're collecting your data. Okay, so you can't take this data without consent and put it in the spreadsheet that Mr. Smith saw, Dr. Smith on such and such a date, and he has this diagnosis. If he's not consented, you can't keep any of those records. But you can do quick searches to identify that there might be a possible patient that you can then reach out to that investigator and have a conversation with about, hey, this person might be applicable for my clinical trial. Are you willing to enroll them with us? So just don't collect anything identifiable. Manage the clinical trial subjects. So after you consent and put them on, this is just to make sure that you understand. Where are my comments?
12:34.
Okay. All right, I got it. Speed it up. All right, so make sure that you're following your protocols, you're coordinating your scheduling, that you have all your correlative components, everything that you did to organize yourself so that when it's go time, you can follow it. Make sure you understand drug modifications, dosing modifications, when to hold. Use your EPIC team to see, what you can say if there's prohibited meds that they can't be on. Put yourself onto the care team, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Make sure that you always advocate for your safety and your welfare of your subjects. Safety first, right? If your protocol is telling you that you should dose, and that patient doesn't look like they're going to tolerate that, you have to go on behalf of the safety of your patient. Make sure that you're always looking at that first, and then have a conversation with your sponsor on why you don't think this is a good idea. But you have to make sure that you're managing your subjects with the safety first, and then also adhering to protocol compliance. It's hard with some of these patients, especially up in the cancer world with protocol compliance. When we have patients with their given terminal diagnosis, or telling them they have to come in every week after they're off treatment or what they have to do, they may not want to do that. It's us continuously educating them to that consent process on why. This is a safety check. This is to make sure that you don't have undue side effects that we didn't know about in long-term side. This is to make sure that we didn't affect something else in your body besides your cancer. So really kind of making sure they understand everything that they're consenting to and agreeing to, and working within what they want to do. But they still have the option to say no to things. All right, eligibility. Make sure that you're using the eligibility of the protocol. Probably one of the other hints, a lot of us develop eligibility checklists or source documents. Sometimes sponsors give us eligibility checklists. Very commonly, those eligibility checklists have half of the protocol inclusion/exclusion criteria on them. Use the protocol document, all right? If you get all care what that fact cover sheet says that you send into the sponsor, they're going to care that you adhere to what's in your protocol. So make sure that every single line item of that eligibility is being met. Have source documentation. We've had this actually pretty recently at one of our affiliate sites. Doctor documented that the patient was HER2 for years and years. Has said this in his notes consistently. Cannot find one pathology record that came back this patient was HER2. I'm not saying it didn't exist, because might actually no documentation that this patient's breast cancer was hormone positive. So we need to go and look and see, why did we say this? How did this happen? Could have been some transcription error too. So make sure you have source documentation for all of your pathology, all of your labs, anything else that you might be following through that patient to prove that they're eligible for that treatment. You don't want to give a drug to a patient that shouldn't have had been exposed to it. Ensure that all required testing has been completed within the time frame. A lot of the protocols like to do this within 70 days of consenting, like 28 days. Bad when they say within 24 hours. Depending on if you're a stroke study, maybe that's possible. But for a lot of us, making sure that you can fit within the time frames of your screening tests. If you're using time frames or scan results outside that window, that patient may be considered invaluable. So you've consented them, you expose them to drugs, you've done all of this, and then their data is not, they're just going to throw it out and not use it for analysis. So if the subject is willing to be this participant, you need to respect that they chose to do this with you, that you're doing everything to make sure that their data counts and it comes out for something. Whether it's good or bad for them, whether it's good or bad for the study overall, that you're allowing them to participate in it fully. Make sure the treating physician is involved. This again is a delegation. A lot of us get delegated this duty. The physician says, here's a patient, and the physician thinks, I never have to see them again. Make sure that that treating, but you know, very, now Shelly will take over. So make sure that they understand that they're signing this eligibility checklist, that they're agreeing that this patient's eligible too. Right, so if they have to take that time and double check, but this is the risk that they're assuming with us. Part of the care team. If you're here and you don't know how to add yourself as a care provider, come see us and we can walk you through it. But it's a great thing in Epic. You can add yourself as a care provider and then you can be alerted when they're admitted. You can be alerted if you want abnormal test results. We don't do that because all of our test results are abnormal. But at least admissions help you, and you can, or they can be admitted when they're discharged. You can alert clinical teams to contact you. So please use yourself as a care provider in the Epic system. It is a little bit different for inpatient or outpatient, but you can get to it either way. Drug services, please, if you're new to interventional therapies, utilize Lisa and then WVU Investigator Drug Services shop. They have Lisa, and she also has a pharm tech, and she has her tentacles in various departments of pharmacy groups across campus to help with her. But they'll help you with ordering, destroying, keeping your drug, returning your drug, so that you're not going to have to understand all the compliances for investigational pharmacy services as well. Correlative collection, I have some ladies here from our biospecimen processing for. Another key group, if you have the ability to tap into them, they live over in the cancer center, but they are not cancer specific. They do things for the CCSI, they handle other projects in other departments in the past, but they can help you with purchasing lab supplies if you need to do it on your own and putting together lab study kits. So then drawing labs, spinning them, processing them, storing them, shipping them, anything on the correlative side. And depending on how complicated your processing is, they can do it internally or they can work with other labs across campus. All right. AE collection. This is a 2-hour training on its own. Just making sure you understand that you're collecting your AE data, that you're determining your terminology and grade, using whatever guidebook you may. Cancer studies have what we call the common toxicity criteria for adverse events. Other people use MEDRAs. You might have another grading criteria that your sponsor provides to you. Having something like MEDRA or CTCAE is nice because it provides consistent grading from study to study to study to study. If you're an investigator, you say, well, I'm just going to decide that this is a mild rash and this is a moderate rash. Every time a different person walks into the room, it's going to be different, inconsistent grading for that. So if you get it very clear that if it looks like this, it's a grade 1, if it looks like this, it's a grade 2, then your data will have more validity to it in the final publication. Always make sure that you're meeting not just your regulations, your sponsor and your protocol things for adverse event capture. There are sometimes where sponsors will say they don't want to collect certain adverse events or serious events because it's related to their disease and they're not interested, but the IRB may. So always understand where you're reporting and what has to be reported when and the time frame that you have to report back. A lot of us use source docs for AE capture. You know, at the top, maybe write if there's a nuance for that you do or don't have to report something, so it kind of leads you and guides you for that. Expedited reporting and SAEs, I'm not really going to touch on this too much, but that is just making sure you understand what the serious adverse event is, that anything that really results in death, that's life-threatening, that requires a hospitalization or prolongation of a hospital, if they have disabilities or incapacities, birth defects, if it's a pregnant person, just make sure that you understand the protocol-specific requirements. Okay, big thing on attribution. Whenever you do SAE training, it's always like, you know your grade. The big thing is expectedness and attribution. So maybe it's an event, but it's the expected event. As I mentioned before, some cancer patients we know are going to have some expected events. But is it also attributable to the disease or to the study or to the trial itself? Not just the drug, but maybe the protocol as a whole. So FDA is always looking for attribution as it relates to the investigational drug or product. IRB is looking for it as it relates to the research. So maybe that patient was hospitalized, wasn't related to the drug, but it was related to something else, a clinical trial. So the FDA overall auditing or the sponsor may not want it as an SAE, but your IRB will. So really understanding what the differences are in your reporting and your SI reporting requirements. All right, maintaining compliance. So our big thing with your patients is what I talked about before in the study visit checklist. So making sure that you have source docs, tools, aids that will help you. We also use a calendar and Encore that you can check in your visits, so you know when the patients are due to come back again. But really developing a very clear organizational system that you can follow where your patients are in their study, and documenting that in the medical records so that all people on the PR team are also aware of this. Biggest thing here, like I talked about before, to maintain compliance, the biggest thing you can do is listen to your patients, listen to your subjects, let them tell you. They'll start telling you if you think that they're going to stop showing up for visits. They'll give you hints. You know, if they stop answering the phone, how can I get a hold of you? What's a good way to talk to you? You know, it doesn't always have to be, you know, what has to be in person, what can be done on the phone, what am I allowed to release to you by email? You should sign a thing saying agreement, you can communicate to them by email, but making sure that you're working with those patients to keep you compliant with the protocol and keep them valid with what they consented to. And talking to your doctors. I need to add that in. How many of our doctors sit there? They're still sit there. They have, you know, protocols that they have to come in for scans every 6 weeks, and that doctor said, I don't like doing that. So we get that all the time. We get that all the time. I don't like to see my patients that often. Like, yeah, but you agreed in this study that you would have me see your patients this often. So this is what you agreed to do. You have to keep that. So it's kind of making sure that your physicians also understand that you as that project manager and as that police officer, that you're sitting there policing that study to make sure that everybody can stay compliant. Documentation, document management. This kind of rolls up also with the next thing on data management. Just making sure that you're collecting adequate source documents. Sometimes it can be a little mountainous, sometimes in EMR, you're looking for things, not sure where it's at. But just to make sure that you have all the data so that you can adhere. And I know Tanya did her talk last month on good documentation practices, so I don't want to repeat too much on that. She talked about source documents and what a good source document is if you weren't able to listen to that session. That is available. No, yes it is. It will be soon.
Will be soon.
Will be soon. So you can go back and listen to her great talk about documentation practices. Source documentation tools are great to have. You can do some very generic ones that you can manipulate for study, whether it's a new patient checklist, whether it's your form consent template. We talk about, we have adverse event logs, we have study visit checklist, whatever it may be that might help you in making sure that you're collecting all the data and information that you need for the lifetime of that patient. This is repeating this, making sure that everything is that Alcoa, but they added something, Alcoa C, complete. So attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. So making sure you're just maintaining good documentation practices. Data management plan for each clinical trial and data entry issues. This can be complicated. We have data people here sitting in the audience too. You can put your data in a timely manner, and your monitor come in and check it, and then it goes to a second team that will issue queries, and those queries will be answered, and it goes to a third team, and that team will issue queries. And so you're constantly living in this constant cycle of data management. The biggest thing I can make sure that you listen to when you're doing this is if you are recording your data in whether it's a paper form or electronic form. And let's say you sit here and say, oh, this was a grade 1 event. And this is what I want to say. That's what my AE log says. This is it. and you get queried and they decide, I want to change this to a grade 2 event, you're changing in that EBC, make sure that it's changed in your source or it's reflected in your source document. A lot of us, we get caught up in the cycles. We say, oh, that's right, that was a grade 2. Yeah, I can understand why you would say that. And you just go ahead and change it in your sponsor thing, but your source documents don't support that. So make sure you're going back and saying, you know what, we talked about this again, and we think that this should really be a grade 2 event, or we think that this date is wrong. So make sure they match, okay? Because a lot of us, if you have to get audited or if you get looked at 4 years later, you're not going to know it. If you were the data person who reported it 4 years ago, chances are it's somebody else, you know, so make sure that everything follows and can close that loop. Make sure you have confidentiality, that if they're asking you to send in documentation, that you're de-identifying those and going within your PHI. Look at data management plans. If you're doing an investigator initiated trial, make sure you have a well-developed data safety management plan on how you're collecting data, how often you're looking at it, who's looking at it, and who's evaluating overall for your study. Case report forms, I think most of you guys should be familiar with what a case report form is. But remember, your case report form cannot be your primary source, right? So that's what's kind of going into, that's what your sponsor is collecting. Make sure that there's a source document that's going in line with your case report form. So this talks about CRM Completions with GCP. It goes back through accuracy, completeness, legibility, making sure everything's been completed, all your amendments have been made, all your adverse events are fully recorded. And I think we talked about a lot of this with data, with documentation practices. Now, monitoring and or routine auditing visits. So a lot of us have monitors that come and visit us every 6 to 8 weeks. And we want to make sure that they're really being provided the information so that they can look at that and ensuring that we're meeting the protocol requirements. Again, a monitor visit is to monitor the study. You don't have to say everything that they're telling you to change that you have to agree with. You have to dictate. There'll be that discussion. They may say, oh, I think that this is something that's a deviation from treatment. You can go back to your PI and say, well, this is how I interpret the protocol. This is what we're seeing. Is it a deviation? Did I report this? Is it not a deviation? We have to get back to the sponsor. So making sure that it's still a partnership with your monitor. They're just representing, they're one person that's representing the sponsor of the CRO. So it's just another member of your team. They're overseeing it to make sure that you're adhering to the sponsor's requirements, but you have to make sure that you internally as the site or the unit are also adhering to what you do. They'll look at your accuracy of data. They'll assure safety of subjects. They do a lot of regulatory reviews and compliance reviews. Generally, they'll come about every couple months. Some of our groups audit us routinely every 3 years. Some groups will only audit for cause. So it's really looking at monitoring and auditing and what your requirements are when you set up that study with your sponsor. If it's internal, you, Tanya, or the IRB may come and audit you. But make sure you have some sort of plan that somebody else is also looking at your data. If it's only you, then you'll always have human error. Now, it might always be something there that you're not collecting correctly. So welcome other people from the outside to come and make sure that you guys are adhering to your protocol and what you agreed to do. This more talks more about regulatory because it's next month, right? You're doing audit? Yes. 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 So I'm going to skip over that. Financial stewardship. Where am I at?
You're almost, yeah, about 8.
Okay. All right. Financial stewardship, research finance is a big world, and I know we have Medicare coverage analysis coming in a couple months as well, guest lecture. Definitely attend that talk if you're dealing with billing through your investigator and whoever your accounting contact is to make sure that you guys are staying compliant, especially if you're doing procedures that are billable to insurance and or the study, that you are not double billing and that you're doing actual charge capture. A lot of us have effort reporting, but there are a lot of other different levels to this, also including Medicare qualifying clinical trial and Medicare coverage analysis. So I think that's what we're going to specialize in the talk in a couple of months here. But this can be a very complicated process if you're doing clinical trials. So really making sure that you're educating yourself and your investigator. As much as the FDA can come and audit you, Medicare can also come and audit you for Medicare reimbursement fraud. So they can walk into the hospital and make sure that we have our claiming process correctly. So it's just another risk area for your team to be well aware of. Contracts, this talks about contract approvals and contract negotiations with OSP. Leadership and professional development. So my last couple of minutes here. Our biggest thing is that most of us in clinical research are here because it's a career path for you. You're choosing to be here. You're choosing to work in this environment. So it's good for you to approach it with that sense of analyzing what your gaps in knowledge are. A lot of our people that I've worked with throughout my years were started regulatory and they went into data. They went from data, they went into QA. They moved from a coordinator role to a QA role. So there's many different roles that you can have, different disease populations and research nursing that you may choose to get into. So it's a very fluid career path for a lot of you, but just understanding there's other resources out there to continue your own professional education, and then mentorship. I think, we kind of learned in our own little department, but what we're hoping that we can do with these talks and these education sessions is that you guys can start collaborating with each other and offering what your expertise is out there. SOCRA and ACRP. We've been a SOCRA exam site for a number of years, which is where I've given this talk to some of you in the past. I don't believe we're doing a test this year. I don't think so. I think we've kind of maxed out our campus, so it might go to an every other year thing. But I encourage you to join either SOCRA or ACRP. We have a lot of people here who are also certified through ACRP. Shelley are you still the president?
I am officially the treasurer.
Okay. For a local ACRP chapter. So if you're ACRP certified and not part of that chapter, then please talk to Shelley. But we're also looking at doing some educational events that are a joint thing. They'll put out emails and newsletters and different things for doing as you don't have to go to the meetings, but lots of different webinars that you can go to as a member as well. This was our day last year. So just International Clinical Trials Day, making sure that you understand what we're doing. We're here coming up with the standards of care, that we're the ones that are out there looking for new treatments, new avenues for our patients. Go put yourselves out there. We do as WVCTN, it's our nonprofit clinical trials network in the state. We have a Facebook page where we'll do some infographics or information about myths and facts about clinical trials. We have patient resources with frequently asked questions and patient resources for the family members to go to. We do community education events as a clinical trials network across the state. To church groups, hospital groups, whoever may want us to come talk to, the Rotary, just offering people to understand what clinical trials are and to be an advocate for clinical trials as a community. So I don't care if you're going to go on a diabetes clinical trial, I just want you to be able to understand and participate on research. All right. These are more Cancer Free Act websites. So last minute, our blurb for Encore. Those departments that are not using Encore want a demo of it, let us know. But Encore is our clinical trial management system that we're using. It is available across the campus for other departments. Layla might kill me for saying that. She's our trainer right now. But you can manage your patients on there. This is a screenshot that tells you, just to show you that there's reporting that you can do. There's task lists that you can create that will sort of trigger you to complete some items in there. There's also, after you are involved with Encore for a while, you have a dashboard that will give you timelines for IRB approval, PRC approval, first time patient went on, mediation reporting. So there's lots of metrics that your department managers would love to see. So really it's something that can help you manage your patients and then help your department kind of get a good picture overall of what research looks like. All right, this is from my other class that I had to do, that you had to take review questions. So I'll keep this off. I think our time's out. But questions from you guys?
We do have one up on the
Can you move it over? Oh. It looks like consent forms. Consent forms are physical documents the patient signs. Should they be kept as physical copies in a binder in a secure and locked office, or should they be scanned into an encrypted computer and then the physical doc shredded? So that's practice for HIPAA compliance. Our consent forms are still a paper document at this institution. We have not moved to electronic consents being approved by IRB as an electronic record. So we have to keep the physical documents. What we do is we keep the original consent forms in a shadow chart. Some trials that are just a one-time consent, keep them in the binders of the original consents, but they do need to be maintained in the original form. Do not shred a physical document that has original signatures on it, please, unless you ever. Ever. Don't even shred the little pieces of paper that you have notes on. I just make sure that you keep anything that's considered original source. We do scan our consent forms into Epic. I think a lot of the different departments across campus that are dealing with clinical patients, they will scan the consent forms into the Epic system as well, just to make sure there's a backup. You can also scan and load your consent forms in Encore. So if that original document would get misplaced, or like when they had the great floods in New Orleans and they lost a lot of those original papers, they had them scanned in the EMR, so they had a backup documentation, and that was in their SOP. But really, you want to maintain the original. Okay. Any other questions? I know I threw a lot at you.
That's great.
It was awesome.
It is a lot. I mean, it's an important job.
It is a very important job.
Very important job.
Yep. All right. Those are my review questions. Thank you.